we have this model of education and training in which the student's head is a sheet of paper, their brain is a sheet of paper, and the teacher has a pen, and all they need to do is write on that sheet of paper and declare victory. And that is wrong.
Sanjay Sarma is a professor of mechanical engineering at MIT, and he's the former vice president of MIT Open Learning. MIT Open Learning is transforming teaching and learning at MIT and around the globe using what you'd expect at MIT, like pretty cool technology. He's also the author of several books that I've read recently. The first is Grasp, the science transforming how we learn. And the second one, which I have in my hands right now, is Workforce Education, a New Roadmap. In his book, Workforce Education, this is what Sanjay and his co-author, Bill Bonvillian, had to say. Applying what we know about how people learn and how to be effective in education, it's often taken a backseat in the development of our education systems. In the US and worldwide, in light of workforce education needs and new technologies, we need, for learning, a significant redesign of existing education systems. I want to talk to Sanjay not only because of his book, Grasp, and all he brought to the table around the new science of learning, but also want to talk to him about his book, Workforce Education, because as workforce leaders, it's not just critical that we understand what it takes to invest in our team in a manner that produces positive outcomes, but it's also important that we get a full picture of what's happening today in the workforce. In his book, Sanjay goes on to say this: workers with higher levels of education tend to be the focus of the majority of employer training attention. And while there's wide variation among U.S. employers, some employers historically adopt what's called high road policies. Higher wages, incentives, teaming, and training coupled to opportunities for promotion, and others take low road approaches, reflecting different attitudes to the role of employees. I think you can probably guess, Jaime, what the low road gets you. So let's dive right in. I wanted to talk to Sanjay, not just about how learning works, but I want to talk to him about how we create a workforce that can compete, where everybody has access to the opportunities they need to be successful. Here's Sanjay Sarma. Let's bring it in.
Hi, Sam.
How are you?
Good, thanks.
There's obviously a lot that we could ask you out of the gate, but I wanted to ask, you wrote the book Grasp, starting with the first book, Grasp. What was the reason you wrote it, and why do you feel it's so important in this moment as we think about work?
Education is the oxygen of work. That's basically what's changed. It's like breathing air. You can't work without breathing air. You can't work without learning. That's point number one. Point number two, work is changing very rapidly. And point number three, if we don't apply the principles of learning judiciously and the science of learning, we're going to be really bad at it. I wish we did as good a job with education and learning as we did with athletes. Interval training, various drills, we don't do that with learning. And I felt it was very, very important that we got into that phase. I wrote this book, obviously, we wrote this book before COVID, but it became very relevant during COVID.
It feels like and I'm going to say America today, but I don't think this is just a problem here. Although in your other book, Workforce Education, you point out why it is very different here. Why is it that the role of training, learning and development, HR around talent development, why aren't those roles required or expected to have classic backgrounds and topics like you talk about in Grasp? I feel like the science of learning should be fundamental requirement to be in roles that are responsible for people development.
I think we take people development for granted. Now, as we see talent shortages, it's becoming a strategic issue. But we've always taken it for a given. And what do? You just tell people to do this and they'll learn it, right? We also don't distinguish between training and learning. Training is when you teach someone to do something mechanical, right? When I say mechanical, it could be something abstractly mechanical, like doing a spreadsheet. But education is when you get people to think abstractly, when they do something creative, make exercise choices. And we've always given it a short shrift. Even in the way we pay our teachers, it is something that really runs deep in American society that I think needs to be fixed.
In the book, you talk about a guy named Herman Ebbinghaus. He was talked about something called the forgetting curve, which seems to, look at the fact that most of what you learn you forget if it's introduced in a certain fashion. I guess what other research or data points would you point to in attempting to convince a person responsible for people development to think differently about how they function in today's workplace if upskilling, reskilling, cross-skilling is truly something that they want to make happen?
We have our techniques all wrong. It's as simple as that. Very simply, we have this model of education and training in which the student's head is a sheet of paper, their brain is a sheet of paper, and the teacher has a pen. And all they need to do is write on that sheet of paper and declare victory. And that is wrong. The real model is that the student is forming a model of the world. And it's like a tree growing, and you give the tree sunlight when the tree wants sunlight, not when it's convenient for you to expose it to sun. You don't just take a little sapling and give it all the sunlight it needs, all the potassium, all the nitrogen, all the, on day one, and then declare victory, right? You don't do that. Sodium, actually. But anyway, the point is that you have to give it when it needs it. And there are lots of tricks. For example, it turns out forgetting is a very essential part of learning. But we actually treat forgetting like a sin. In fact, the human brain requires to forget things, otherwise our heads would explode, with too much information. And so rather than applying techniques that recognize these realities of our humanity, we sort of have this really false assumption, and we sort of plow through assuming we're going to get good results, and we don't. And so we assume that, therefore, our techniques, we just think that we sort of dismiss training as useless, because we do it wrong, right? Sort of bizarre cycle of events that we're trapped in.
One of my favorite parts of the book was as you talk about discovery learning and the power of failure, curiosity, struggling through the process. I guess, can you tell us why does that work?
If it's again comes down to this business of writing on a sheet of paper, which is the student's head, that sort of misunderstanding. The student is formulating a model. We are animals, and animals like to seek, we discover, right? And that is the instinct that drives us. The equivalent to saliva for hunger is dopamine for curiosity. So when we're hungry, the body generates saliva. When we're curious, the body generates dopamine. It turns out dopamine activates a circuit in the brain, it's the dopaminergic circuit that facilitates learning. And if you skip the step of making someone hungry and shove food down their throat, you know what's going to happen? They're going to forget it, except in a hot dog eating contest. There's something else involved the next day, right? You throw up, right? And that's the same thing with learning. If you make someone curious, they will absorb it. If you just shove it down their throat, they will regurgitate it in the exam, and it's gone. It will not stay.
So if I was an HR director for a restaurant brand and I just built hour-long training videos and made you click through them every 30 seconds to show me you're still there, and then to be a quiz at the end, what's created when you do that?
No, you just created all sorts of bad habits that result in no learning, and they'll pass the test, but you haven't achieved anything. But if on the other hand, you broke it up into 10 videos where you reminded them on day 1, day 3, day 5, just 10 minutes, you would have much better results.
What was your favorite part of the book to write?
My biographical bits about how I went to work and suddenly everything came into context.
Yeah. I was talking about your second book, not again, I say second book, but several, workforce education. This morning I'm in the city of Newark, and I sit on the workforce development board, and we just kicked off a tech task force with the focus on how do we create more opportunities for Newarkers in Newark. And out of the gate, I held your book up to start the meeting and said, everybody should buy this book. Because as we figure out how do we create more opportunities for more people, this is, I think, a great framework to start our discussion. I guess same question from Grasp. I guess what led you to write this book about workforce education?
It's interesting. We have primary education, we have secondary education, we have tertiary education. So people go to community college or to university. we don't have quaternary education. And in a gig economy, when people are changing jobs, when technology is changing, if you want to learn something, what do? You're really going to take a year off and go get a master's, or 2 years? There is no, it's not defined. And so really we wrote this book to point out it isn't defined. There are models, but we haven't formalized them. There are no incentives, right? Companies sort of make stuff up because they don't have options, right? And we need to systematize it. So this vacuum is what drove us to writing this book.
You say in the book that there's a training problem. You said that a strong system of workforce skills training could make up for our college education divide, but U.S. labor markets generally invest in suboptimal levels of broad skills training because after one company trains people, competitors often acquire those employees, and thus the first company failed to recapture its training investment. I thought, again, if you went to a SHRM conference or if you went to any one of the trade association events, you would believe opposite of what you had to say in your book around training. It seems like all companies care about is people when you hear them on stage. I guess, where's the disconnect?
The disconnect is this. I mean, I'll start by describing the Northern European models. So you're in high school in Northern Europe. By the way, we have VOTEC schools in Massachusetts, vocational tech. Most of the rest of the country shut them down. Massachusetts has 27 of them. It's quite amazing. You're getting a degree, you're getting your high school diploma, but you're also learning to be a mechanic. In Germany, what would happen is you then go work at BMW, you get a certificate. BMW, the master or the expert machinist there tells you how, you do machining. And so in machining, it's often historically been a male machinist. And then you learn, and then you get a certificate, and you go to Mercedes or to some other company, Volkswagen, they accept it. And it's not seen as a loss, right? It's not seen as trying to get them back. And the certification is accepted across. And the person doing the training really appreciates it. The school supports it. The system supports it because they're getting this training initially in school, right? Maybe they get advanced training afterwards. And it's highly systematized, just as a bachelor's degree is systematized. We don't have the same system here, really. I mean, we have it sort of in ad hoc ways across small industry groups in certain areas. We don't have a systematized approach. If you don't have a degree, how do you sort of mix and match? And that apprenticeship system is really transformed. And in fact, it's a central part of the German, manufacturing behemoth, when it comes to precision manufacturing, for example. So we don't have that. Now, you can always say we have it if you take very ad hoc solutions, but it's ad hoc. That's a problem.
Why? I guess the question I have is, why does it work there, and why does it feel like, in many ways, when you look around, whether it's workforce, like the one-stop federal workforce centers inside of different U.S. cities, why does it feel like there is nobody's working together? Is I guess back to the question, are they just working together better?
Yeah, they're working together. There's a sense of identity. If you go to Stuttgart, right, you go Schwabia, there is a sense of we are the manufacturing, hardcore metalworking hub of the world. We take pride in this. The tide lifts all boats. We're trying to create workforce. So when we need to hire them back, we'll hire them back. But it doesn't matter if they leave my company and go somewhere else. The mentors and the teachers really take pride in their task. It's not just, punching a number and saying, oh, I got, an ROI. It's a sort of it's a sense of community. I think our system has many good things about it, but one of them is that we are much more transactional. And the transactional approach and things like this mitigates against creating this sort of apprenticeship system, in which case the government and educational institutions need to step in, and that hasn't happened either, not on the scale we need.
I think the other thing that's scary is, again, I was reading through this point of, the declining rate of investment in training as a community. I think ranked 29th of 31 countries according to the OECD. You mentioned also the declining rate of investment by companies, but it seems like when you double click on that, the type of training that's being invested in isn't necessarily skill building. It's
not skill building. It's to do the next job. I mean, look, what it is, there used to be company towns, things were highly vertically integrated, et cetera, right? Then we went to the other extreme. Just do what we need, damn it. That's it. That's just this job, right? And so we disintegrated, the company disintegrated. You have a lot of contractors, and then it becomes transactional. And if you hire someone to do a job, you want to train as little as possible so they can do the job. But what you don't do is give them longer skill or deeper skills that will pay back in the long term. It's a very transactional thing. And that leads to this disintegration to some extent, or the lack of integration.
There's this, credentialing. It's a big topic. What, there's 700,000 plus credentials now. Some say there's credential inflation. How if you were talking to the frontline worker, again, the 1 in 2 American workers who are a $400 parking ticket away from poverty, that are trying to figure out how they put themselves in a position to be successful, while at the same time dealing with all the challenges you mentioned in the book: transportation, childcare, the wraparound programs that maybe are absent. What can we do if at a community level to create a space where frontline workers and every worker get the same shot?
The problem with many years ago, and I still do work in standards. If you have 1,000 standards, you don't have a standard, right? If you have 1,000 different pipe threads, you don't have a standard, because they'll never fit together. The odds of getting what you want are a screw thread, right? Now, or a bolt sizing. The problem with so many credentials, the reason we have so many credentials is we actually don't have credentials. It's all very ad hoc, right? The point is that we need to sort of, as a society, agree and standardize them, and someone needs to step in, industry groups, government, and sort of reduce them and make them interoperable. And that's the problem we're stuck in right now. And then the other thing is, if companies won't do it, or if companies do it, it could be selfish. It could be, you're certified in my product, as opposed to you're certified in a deeper skill, right? And if the government wants to do it, good news is you can do a lot of stuff online, but not everything, right? So the stuff that you can do online, you should do online. You should have weekend workshops. You need to give tax incentives or other sort of incentives so people can gather those certificates. We've got to also give prospective students an advanced sense of where the market is. Don't let them why should they make these bets about, I want to do this, but maybe the market won't be there, right? So we need a navigator, tell them how to navigate their careers. This is what it's going to take. And when you have an apprenticeship system with the BMWs, the Mercedes-Benzes of the world, that sort of gets baked in because the companies are participating, right? But here, if the companies don't do it, or they don't standardize, and the government does it, the government needs to sort of look ahead and be very mindful of where the jobs are, so people don't jump into blind alleys.
Yeah, I think the point you make about companies is a big one. They're not always seated around the table with, again, speaking from a workforce development program perspective, the biggest organizations inside most cities may not involve themselves in a lot of the grassroots initiatives, whether it's for programs for reentry, or it's programs for out of work workers or homeless youth, these critical, ground floor programs. And I don't know, I hear it all the time from, as I travel with workforce centers, who they constantly come back to this point of not knowing what companies want, like this conversation around skills. I don't know why it seems like we still haven't, is there a skills gap, or is it something else?
There's a skills mismatch. There's a mismatch. Okay. The problem is, there is a bit of a gap as well, but it's really almost always a mismatch, which is a mismatch between what companies want and the systems in place, what they deliver, and a lack of connection between the two. That's really what it comes down to. The other thing is, there's also always going to be a tension that companies want someone to do the job that they have right now, and institutions need to prepare people for life a little bit. So that's a understandable mismatch. But it can be that it's like digging the channel, from the British Islands to France. It can be that we dig the two tunnels and they don't connect to each other. That's sort of what's happening right now.
Yeah, it's wild. Sanjay, I really appreciate you taking the time. I have one final question for you, and I'm gonna try to lead you into it. So don't let me take you down the wrong path. But you say in the book, in your book Grasp, it says, "Give a man a fish, he'll eat for a day. Teach a man to fish, he'll eat for a lifetime." And you say it makes a degree of sense, but that's assuming the way that you teach him how to fish stays relevant for the rest of his life. You're quoting Max Ventia in that. What is your hope for the future of work?
Look, work is going to be dynamic. It's going to be short gigs. Your next gig will depend on how well you did in your last gig. And between gigs, you're going to have to learn something new. That's why I say learning is education. I mean, learning is oxygen in the workforce, right? I think that we need to really think through the shape of the economy 10, 20 years from now and leave on the bread in some ways, right? The jobs, the gigs with educational opportunities. And we need to have a whole bunch of new educational learning opportunities and credentials so that they can prove that they learned, so that that interleaving can work. And we don't have that right now, right? Between your bones, you have cartilages. Learning is that cartilage. We don't have that. And we have to figure that out.
Sanjay, thanks for taking time.
Thanks a lot. Lovely to talk to you, Sam.
$44 million adults today lack an associate degree level of education and earn less than $35,000 a year. Half of these people are likely to live in poverty. Only 11% of these working class Americans earn a bachelor's degree by age 24. Only 2 of every 25 children born in lower income households ever reach the top quintile of the economic ladder. They're of all races and ethnic groups. They're being left behind. They need a new workforce education system. Without action, their situations will deteriorate. The jobs of the future, indeed more and more jobs of today, require significantly more education and training than they have. There was no better person to talk to, not just about how you create an environment where the most learning can happen. Sanjay talked about the fact that getting your techniques right, because a lot of our techniques when it comes to learning and education and preparing people for work are wrong, rooted in outdated models. Sanjay even said that training in a lot of ways is transactional, which makes a lot of sense given the fact that the majority of workforce training today is a check the box or not even skill building in nature. But I think most importantly, to the quote I just let in, straight from the book Workforce Education, A New Roadmap, was the discussion around a skills mismatch. It was a discussion around the fact that the one thing we can do is work together better. The one thing that community colleges can do is connect better with their consumer, the student, and with employers in their community. The best thing that an employer can do is work with the community colleges. The best thing government can do is to work with all parties involved. This comes back to the fact that this is not any one group's fault or one group's job. It's everybody's. And if you're an employer or a leader of people who wake up every day and think about preparing your workforce to perform their best at work, it is your job, it is your responsibility to do all you can to make sure that your people are accessing the information they need to perform the job in a manner that is the right technique, that we're using the right techniques to get people where they need to go. And at the same time that we're considering the state of the workforce, what's got us here, who the people are on the front lines of work, where they're coming from when they come into work, and also where they're going back to when they leave work. All this has to be at the forefront of how we think about not just work and the future of work, but the people that make work work. And if you haven't already, and if you want to have your mind blown around how learning really works and how you can level up the way your organization is leveling up their workers, I highly encourage you to go out and pick up Sanjay Sarma's book, Grasp the Science Transforming How We Learn. And when you're done with that, also pick up Workforce Education, A New Roadmap. And you know what I'm going to say next? You should probably do that at your local bookstore. Now, don't forget to subscribe to Bring It In so you never miss an episode. We've got some awesome guests lined up that you're not going to want to miss. Now, back to work.